Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand.
And welcome back. Today, we have really stacked our sources to tackle an intellectual challenge that is, I think, both ancient and completely ultra-modern. We're talking about the organization of complexity itself.
Right. And if you, our listener, have ever had that feeling that the systems you're in, whether it's a corporate bureaucracy, an academic field, even a political movement, that they always seem to fall back into the same rigid top-down structure, even when they claim they're being adaptive or innovative, then this deep dive is, well, it's your intellectual escape route. We are fundamentally challenging the premise that reality has to have a center.
Yeah, that's really the core mission here. Our sources today, they go deep into the very fabric of how we organize knowledge, how we structure power, and they argue that our sort of historical, almost compulsive reliance on these centralized hierarchical models, it's not just inefficient.
It's worse than that.
It's philosophically bankrupt.
Huh.
We're basically stepping onto a conceptual battlefield of organization.
And it really scratches what we're calling the existential itch, doesn't it? I mean, why is it that every single time we try to wrap our heads around a complex reality like, say, climate change or a global supply chain, we always end up just boiling it down to a single cause.
A single villain.
A single villain or a single subject we can point a finger at.
Yeah.
And this simplification just leads to these incredibly frustrating, limited explanations.
And the problem, according to this framework, isn't that the world is so complex.
It's us.
Exactly. It's our thinking. Our inherited structure of thought is just. It's not up to the task. We're trying to fit this messy, interconnected, jungle undergrowth of reality into the neat, clean branches of a family tree. And that failure of single source thinking to capture how things are really connected, that's the human problem we're digging into.
And that tension, that's what gives us the core conflict for this entire deep dive. It's this intellectual showdown between the rhizome and the tree root.
And you can really think of it as a choice. We're choosing between two models. On one hand, you have a model based on unity. That's the tree. It has fixed points, fixed positions, and it demands a single trunk, a single origin, a single root.
And on the other hand,
You have a model of flat multiplicity. And that's the rhizome. It's the network. It's the chaotic, dynamic system of lines that connect everywhere with no designated start or finish.
So our journey today is really to unpack why this search for the one, the one central cause, the one singular subject, the original point of control, why that's the biggest obstacle to actually understanding how systems work, and how this really radical act of thinking flat can transform everything from measurement to art to even, political organization.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so the first hurdle we have to get over is, well, it's a big one. It's deeply ingrained in how we think. Our sources demand that we make this huge conceptual leap. We've had to start treating the multiple not as just a collection of different things.
Well, it's not just many things.
But as a substantive, a noun in its own right. It becomes the multiplicity.
And that is the revolutionary step, because the second you grant the multiplicity's substantive existence, the structure, by definition, it ceases to have any relation to the one. And that one is that single pivot point we're always looking for.
The genius inventor.
The genius inventor, the monolithic resource, the one God, whatever it is. The multiplicity simply refuses to be defined by any of those singular anchors.
But wait a minute. If you take away the anchor, if there's no central subject, no organizing principle, doesn't that just lead to, intellectual chaos? How do you even begin to study or define something that is, by its very nature, completely centerless?
That's the immediate objection, right? That's the arborescent or tree-like objection. We assume that a lack of a center must mean a lack of structure. But the multiplicity is inherently rhizomatic, which means its structure is defined by its connections, its dimensions, not by a single root. When we try to force a root structure onto it, we end up creating what the source material calls arborescent pseudo-multiplicities.
Arborescent pseudo-multiplicities. Okay, that's a mouthful. So give us the plain English version of that.
Think about a massive corporate org chart, or like the classic biological taxonomy system. They look incredibly complex, right? They've got multiple layers, thousands of entries, but they all secretly refer back to a single originating logic.
The CEO at the top.
The CEO at the top, or the original kingdom or phylum definition in biology. They look multiple, but their internal logic is secretly singular. A true multiplicity just defies that hidden order because it doesn't need to justify itself to a central point.
So the implication here is massive. There's no pivot unity in the object, so the thing itself doesn't have one single definitional core and no centralized division in the subject. It doesn't split neatly along a binary like good versus evil or us versus them coming from one consciousness.
No, it's just pure lateral connection. A multiplicity, they say, only has determinations, magnitudes, and dimensions. And here's the really crucial consequence of this flat existence. Those dimensions, they cannot increase in number without the multiplicity changing in nature.
Okay, so this isn't just about scaling up. It's not just adding more of the same.
Not at all. It's a qualitative leap that gets triggered by adding a new line of connection, a new dimension.
Let's nail down the villain then, because the sources are so clear that the primary intellectual enemy is the concept of unity and all the hierarchical structures it creates. This is a direct attack on the myth of a singular will, this idea that control rests in one place.
And they use the puppet strings analogy to just completely dismantle this myth. And this is where the framework really flips our classical assumptions on their head. When we see a puppet moving, our cultural default is to assign that action to a single subject.
The genius puppeteer, the artist's will.
Exactly. But the sources argue that the strings of the puppet, the lines of action, they aren't tied to that singular unified will. They're tied to a multiplicity of nerve fibers inside the operator's body. And those nerve fibers, in turn, they form another puppet in other dimensions, which is connected to the first one.
It's an endless chain of interconnected systems then.
It's an endless chain. The action doesn't originate in some conscious, unified brain subject. The performer's nerve fibers, which are themselves this complex, decentralized weave, they fall through the gray matter, through the grid, and into the undifferentiated. The action emerges from the weave itself. It's an impersonal system.
That makes the movement less about command and control and more about pattern emergence. It reminds me of trying to figure out why a global market crash happened. You never find one person or one single mistake.
Never.
You find this unbelievably dense, tangled mess of automated systems and risk assessments and, nerve fibers connected to other systems. The crash comes from the weave, not from some command center.
Precisely. The source material even brings up this mythological parallel. The fates, or the Norns, who are weaving the destiny of gods and men. This isn't a singular conscious creator dictating what happens. It's a constant impersonal process of weaving and connecting. The brain is just another nexus in the string system, not the unified ruler on top.
So action is an output of the system's interconnectedness, not an input from a singular will.
You got it.
And this brings us back to the definition of the assemblage. Because if everything is defined by its connections and its dimensionality, we need a really precise way to talk about how a system transforms.
An assemblage isn't just a random group of things. It's defined as the precise increase in the dimensions of a multiplicity. This is the language of transformation. We tend to think of change as just scaling, adding more items to the inventory. But real change is dimensional.
Let's try a non-technical analogy here to make this clear.
Yeah.
Okay, imagine you have a two-dimensional system, a simple recipe written on a piece of paper. It has ingredients and steps. If you scale it, you make more copies of the recipe, you make the font bigger. You haven't changed the system's nature.
Still two dimensions, text and paper.
You've just gotten bigger within those same two dimensions.
Yeah.
But if you create an assemblage, you add a new dimension. You take that recipe and you put it into a functioning, dynamic restaurant.
Oh.
Now you've added dimensions like time, the synchronization of the waitstaff finance, all the supply chain connections, and affect customer satisfaction. The system isn't a simple list anymore. It's a market. And the laws that govern it have radically increased. That dimensional leap, it necessarily changes the nature of that initial multiplicity.
That's a great way to put it. The lesson there is just so profound. True. Fundamental change is a function of expansion and connection, adding new lines that create a new dimension. It's not about refinement or just scaling within the old fixed structure. The rhizome basically says, if you want a different outcome, you have to connect in a new way. So now we need to really formalize the structural difference. The tree base, the arborescent system, it's built on points and positions, fixed locations based on hierarchy and spatial organization.
Right.
The rhizome model is built on the complete opposite claim. Rhizomes have only lines, not points or positions.
And lines mean flow, movement, velocity. Points mean fixed structure, control location. In our everyday lives, we live and die by points, right? Our address, our job title, the milestone we just hit. The rhizome is asking us to prioritize the flow, the connections, the velocity over the fixed achievement.
And the beauty of this distinction is illustrated just perfectly by the source's anecdote about the pianist Glenn Gould. Gould was famous for his incredible speed, but the source argues he wasn't just showing off his virtuosity when he sped up a performance.
He was actually doing a kind of structural transformation.
Yeah.
A traditional musical score, it fixes the notes as points in time and space.
Yeah, as positions.
So when you accelerate the performance past a certain threshold, those discrete fixed points, the individual notes, they stop being isolated positions and they start flowing into one continuous dynamic line.
He is using speed as a dimensional transformation. He is forcing the whole piece to proliferate, refusing to let it be read as a fixed point-based structure. He's turning the music into this dynamic wheeze of connection and velocity. It's the difference between looking at an assembly line as a series of static stations versus seeing it as a constant, unbroken current of production.
And this shift just completely redefines how we approach measurement, which seems like the logical next step. I mean, if we throw out fixed universal points, how can we count anything?
We can't in the old way. The sources redefine number entirely. It is no longer this universal concept for counting things based on their location in a given dimension. Instead, number itself becomes a multiplicity that changes depending on the dimensions you're considering. This is what they call the primacy of the domain.
So the context matters more than the unit itself. A dollar in one dimension, say, as part of a hedge fund, operates under completely different laws than a dollar in another dimension, like a local charity's budget. The number is secondary to the system it's in.
That's it exactly. We do not have universal units of measure. We only have multiplicities or varieties of measurement. Think about measuring human performance. A traditional tree-based system tries to find one single metric, a standardized test score, to measure the student, the unit. A rhizomatic view insists that the student's number depends entirely on the dimensions considered: their social engagement, their artistic output, their critical thinking.
Right. You can't just reduce all that complexity to one single overarching unit.
You can't.
So this is a direct conceptual counterattack on unity, which we already established is the villain. We need to know the villain's strategy. How does unity actually perform this power takeover?
This is the decoding of the mechanism of control, unity, the centralized authority. It only emerges when there's a power takeover in the multiplicity. And this takeover happens via the signifier, a symbol, a law, a brand, a defining term, or by a corresponding subjectification proceeding.
Which means?
Which means the imposition of a singular subject or consciousness, the founder, the savior, the genius.
That moment of forced singularity creates a fixed center. It either acts as a pivot unity for all the objective elements, so it establishes these fixed one-to-one relationships between points, or it acts as the one for the subject, forcing everything into a simplistic binary division. It just collapses complexity for the sake of control.
And here we get to the key technical term for how this power grab works: overcoding. Unity always operates in an empty dimension supplementary to the system being considered. That's what overcoding is. It's the arbitrary imposition of a hierarchy from a dimension that doesn't structurally exist within the flat system itself.
Okay, let's simplify overcoding with a strong analogy.
Yeah.
Imagine you have a three-dimensional ecosystem, say a complex coral reef, where different species are all interacting horizontally. If a corporation comes along and imposes a fourth dimension, profit margin, that is supplementary to the system's actual biology, geology, and chemistry. That corporation is overcoding the reef. It's an outside layer of control.
It's the phantom dimension. It dictates how the existing three dimensions have to behave, even though it doesn't physically fill those three dimensions itself. It's the management layer that insists its abstract metrics take priority over the lived reality of the system below it. And the crucial assertion from our sources is that a rhizome never allows itself to be overcoded. It resists hierarchy because it fills its own reality completely.
Because if it fills its dimensions completely, there's no empty supplementary dimension for the overcoder to come in and occupy. The system is structurally immune to external control, unless it fundamentally changes itself.
Precisely. And this leads us to the core assertion, the architectural principle of this entire framework, which you called the mic drop quote earlier.
All multiplicities are flat.
All multiplicities are flat.
Meaning they fill or occupy all of their existing dimensions. If the system is four-dimensional, it is entirely four-dimensional. There is no fifth dimension just waiting around for an external authority, a law, a deity, a CEO to come in and assert hierarchical control. This radical flatness is the condition of existence for the rhizome.
And all these flat multiplicities reside on what the source calls the plane of consistency, or the grid. This is the theoretical surface where all the connections, all the lines are traced.
It's the ultimate anti-hierarchical canvas. There's no background, no pre-drawn structure, only the dynamically expanding weave. And the most interesting thing about this plane Its dimensions don't stay fixed.
No, they increase simultaneously with the number of connections, the lines that are made on it.
It's a self-expanding, self-defining field of exteriority. The more complexity and connectivity you build, the more room you create for new complexity, and that stands in complete opposition to the rigid, fixed grid of the arborescent model, which just assumes a finite number of predetermined spaces to fill. Okay, so we have a system that is flat, has no center, and is defined only by its lines. This brings up the essential question. If there's no central subject making things happen, how does the system ever change? How does transformation happen? And the answer is, it's rigorous, and frankly, it's thrilling. It happens via the outside.
That's the key distinction. Multiplicities are not defined internally. They're not defined by who they are, the subject, or what they contain, the object. They are defined strictly by the outside.
And the mechanism for engaging with that outside is this abstract line, the line of flight, or deterritorialization. This is the single mechanism that can transform the multiplicity. It's the escape vector. It's the moment the system breaks its fixed relationships and expands into a new dimension.
Deterritorialization isn't just, moving somewhere else. It's the active process of dissolving fixed boundaries and connections in the existing structure in order to connect to something new and external. So if you want true transformation, you don't look inward to refine your mission statement. You look outward for a new connection that fundamentally alters the dimension of the whole system. And this prevents overcoding from ever successfully maintaining permanent control.
The sources give us three extremely rigorous, almost engineering-like definitions for what the line of flight does, all at the same time. This is where the philosophy gets really technical.
Okay, so the first reality marked by the line of flight is the reality of a finite number of dimensions that the multiplicity effectively fills. This is just a restatement of flatness, but it's crucial because it affirms the system's limits. It's a specific, fully occupied space in conceptual reality.
So, before the line of flight, the system is what it is. No more, no less. It's stable because it's full.
Correct. The second reality marked by the line of flight is the impossibility of a supplementary dimension, unless the multiplicity is fundamentally transformed by the line of flight itself. This is the direct countermeasure to overcoding. An external unity can't just be imposed from the outside.
This means if a corporate bureaucracy, a fixed system, tries to implement an agile rhizomatic methodology, which is a new dimension, it can't just bolt it on.
Right. It never works.
The system has to undergo a crisis, a line of flight, that fundamentally reweaves the whole organization. The rules have to change, or that new dimension will just be rejected. It has to escape its old form to accept the new one.
That radical change is the prerequisite. And finally, the third reality marked by the line of flight is the necessity of flattening all of the multiplicities onto a single plane of consistency or exteriority, regardless of how many dimensions they have.
So even if I have a small, hyper-complex, six-dimensional artistic assemblage and a massive but simple two-dimensional manufacturing process, they are both forced to connect laterally on that single flat grid.
Hierarchy becomes structurally impossible because they are forced onto the same exterior plane. They can only relate through connections, not through rank.
This is the aha moment. The system isn't chaos. It's a rigid, flat reality that is constantly seeking new dimensions through radical connection and escape deterritorialization. Stability is achieved through dynamic flow and the capacity for self-transformation, not through fixed points.
It's a concept that's so difficult for us because we're trained to believe that structure equals hierarchy. The rhizome says no, structure equals connectivity and velocity.
And before we move on to the practical applications, the high stakes of what happens when we refuse this model, let's just quickly review the key concepts in our toolkit. We need the cocktail party definition for these to make sure these powerful ideas really stick.
Let's do it. First up, multiplicity. What's the core takeaway?
Multiplicity is the web that cannot be reduced to a center. It's the fundamental assertion that the many is the substance itself, without needing a singular subject or object to hold it all together.
The simple version, the web, is the reality.
Exactly. Next, the structural model, the rhizome.
The rhizome is the system of pure lines, not fixed points. It's the blueprint for how multiplicity organizes itself. It's all about connection, flow, and velocity. If you can trace a line between two things, you're in the rhizome.
Then we have the method of control, the antagonist. Overcoding.
Overcoding is the act of imposing a false, outside hierarchy onto a flat system. It's the power grab that happens when a centralized unity, a signifier or a subject, occupies an empty supplementary dimension to assert arbitrary control. It's the phantom layer of management.
And finally, the theoretical surface where all this action happens, the plane of consistency.
This is the single flat field where all multiplicities, regardless of their complexity, have to reside and connect. It's fundamentally flat, and its dimensions are constantly increasing as new lines of connection are traced on it. It is, in a sense, the outside of everything.
So we've established the structure of reality. Now, what happens if we ignore it? The high stakes are, well, they're nothing less than our capacity for genuine transformative thought itself. If we insist on forcing the world into these tree-like models, we just stay stuck in repetitive cycles, hitting the same conceptual ceilings over and over again.
And the application here targets the ultimate vessel of knowledge, the
Right.
book, or, by extension, any system of knowledge organization, like a database or an educational curriculum. The sources describe the ideal form for a book as something that completely refuses narrative hierarchy.
So the ideal knowledge system would lay everything out on that flat plane of exteriority, on a single page, a single sheet. Lived events, historical determinations, abstract concepts, specific individuals, large social formations, they all have to be connected laterally.
Right. There is no predetermined structure of, introduction, body, conclusion, all designed to funnel the reader towards one single thesis.
It functions more like a radically dynamic map, not a fixed narrative tree. It encourages you to trace unique paths and establish novel connections lines, rather than just following a fixed, authorized sequence of points. You, the reader, you create the dimension through your active connection making.
And to ground this in reality, the source material points to a historical practitioner of this exact kind of flat writing, Heinrich von Kleist, the early 19th century German author.
Kleist, we're told, invented a writing of this flat rhizomatic type, a writing that's made of a broken chain of effects and variable speeds. The structure is constantly accelerating and transforming, and it's always using open rings in relation with the outside.
There's no unified interior consciousness guiding the narrative, no singular subject defining the meaning. It's just pure flow and connection, resisting the closure and the stability that classical narrative forms demand. And this is in complete contrast to the classical or romantic book, which gets its authority from the interiority of a substance or a subject.
The definitive ending, the author's singular intent.
Exactly.
And this contrast between forms of knowledge, it opens up the political implication, which is maybe the most critical takeaway for our listener. It's this stark opposition between two modes of organization, the war machine book against the state apparatus book.
The state apparatus book is the classic textbook, the bureaucratic manual, the codified body of law. It's inherently hierarchical. It relies on unity, on overcoding, on fixed points, and it defines its meaning through the interiority of its own substance. Its primary function is to manage territory, consolidate power, and enforce closure. It's about fixing people and things in positions.
And the war machine book.
Is the opposite. It relies on lines, transformation, velocity, and a constant relationship with the outside. It is inherently destabilizing to fixed systems. It doesn't rely on a central command structure. It relies on the dynamic connection of its decentralized parts and its capacity for deterritorialization to escape the rigid control of the state apparatus.
You can see this tension everywhere. A state apparatus corporation, it tries to lock down its intellectual property and control distribution paths. It builds walls around its fixed points.
While a war machine approach is decentralized, open source, viral, it operates through pure lines of flight, constantly changing its form to evade capture.
So if the state apparatus insists on fixed, standardized units and definitions points, the war machine uses speed and flow to transform those points into lines, and by doing that, it changes the dimension of the entire conflict. It's less about conquering territory and more about creating dynamic networks that just flow around fixed territories.
And the profound implication is that the form of our knowledge production mirrors the form of our power structures. If we keep structuring our educational, our professional, our political systems like state apparatus books, we are guaranteeing hierarchy, stasis, and the failure to adapt to truly dimensional change.
And finally, this framework dictates that flat multiplicities of any number of dimensions are inherently asignifying and asubjective.
Signifying means they don't point toward one single ultimate meaning or a central signifier. The meaning is the network itself, the action of the system. And subjective means they don't rely on an internal consciousness or actor. The puppet moves, not because a ghost is willing it to, but because the weave is active.
And this shift away from singular identity is even designated differently in our language. We traditionally use the definite article, the corporation, the subject, the truth. The rhizome rejects this singularity. It's designated by indefinite articles, or more specifically, partitives.
And that simple grammatical shift reflects a profound philosophical orientation. Instead of seeking to identify the rhizome, we speak of some of a rhizome. Instead of declaring the leader, we acknowledge some of the collective's organizing principle. You're talking about a segment of a boundless active process, and this resists the political and commercial urge to solidify an identity or to delimit influence, which is the foundational move of the overcoder.
Think about corporate branding. Every major company insists on being the something, the Apple, the Microsoft, the Bank of America, to establish that singular identity and authority, the unified pivot point. The partitive designation, some couch grass, is an intellectual act of resistance. It's acknowledging that whatever you're naming is only a segment of a constant open-ended flow, and that flow can always connect somewhere else.
It forces us to acknowledge that we are always dealing with an open-ended process, an ongoing construction, not a fixed, finished entity. The work of knowledge is tracing the lines, not capturing the points. Hashtag outro.
To bring this powerful abstract framework back to the listener's immediate world, let's just return to that modern analogy we were touching on.
Right, think about generative AI and machine learning models. The state apparatus model is the classic, large, centralized language model, where the source code, the data set, the training parameters, it's all proprietary, fixed, and guarded. This system, even though it's massive, it tries to establish a pivot unity, the central algorithm, and it uses overcoding to make sure that all generated outputs refer back to its defined boundaries. It creates these arborescent pseudo-multiplicities of data based on a hidden, unified logic.
And the rhizome is the distributed, peer-to-peer network of open-source models. It's the unmonitored viral spread of innovation, the decentralized flow of data itself. It's inherently flat. Its dimensions increase with every new connection, and it's constantly seeking lines of flight, new radical integrations with external systems to deterritorialize away from any central control. It defines itself purely by its exterior connections, never allowing a proprietary fourth dimension to take over.
So the core lesson from this deep dive is pretty clear. True, transformative knowledge comes not from summarizing fixed points, but from tracing the dynamic connections, the lines. We have to perpetually resist the intellectual and political urge to simplify complexity back down to a single source, a single subject, or a single unit. The path forward requires embracing the outside and accepting the necessity of constant dimensional change.
We have to look at every organizational chart, every piece of knowledge, every bureaucracy, and ask, are we reading this like a war machine book, prioritizing flow and escape? Or are we submitting to the state apparatus book, prioritizing fixed positions and hierarchical control? Because if we allow the rhizomatic nature of reality to be successfully overcoded, we miss the genuine potential for structural transformation.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. If our most entrenched systems, our governments, our schools, our corporations, are all structured like these state apparatus books, where is the most unexpected line of flight being traced in society today? What system, maybe one that seems small or insignificant right now, is connecting to the outside in a way that is about to fundamentally change the dimensions of its entire domain?
What hidden dimension is just waiting to be filled through a radical act of connection and escape, pushing us beyond mere quantitative growth into real qualitative change?
Find that line, trace that rhizome. Thank you for joining us.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.